and city lights, ancient roots and modern nights, dreams that shimmer, dreams that drive. We were born to rise. Yisrael thrive. In the glow of endless skies, hear our future harmonize. Thriving is our resistance. This is how we stay alive. Yisrael thrive. Through the rhythm of the streets, through the songs of history.
Welcome to Yisrael Thrive, guys. It's just me today, Shayna, but we're still thriving as our resistance, even if Jen can't come today. Unfortunately, she's taking a little bit of time off to spend with her family, and we wish her all the best, and we will see her soon. What's everybody out there doing today on this lovely Sunday? I hope you guys had a wonderful Shabbat, Shavua Tov, and let's just dive right into what we're going to talk about today. So today we have a wonderful guest. We have actually Nathan Jeffay, a journalist from Israel, who's going to be coming and talking about many different things, from the war in Israel to the reporting he's done to his own Aliyah. But before that, let's go ahead and talk about some of the local things that have been going on in the United States. So this week, this is my thorn for the week, unfortunately. Graham Plattner wins the Democratic nomination for the U.S. Senate in Maine. I am incredibly disappointed in Democrats for doing this, to be honest with you. I was a leftist for many years. For over 20 years, I was an ever farther leftist. And I remember when the left talked about punching Nazis, and now we're electing them. And I find that to be a complete and utter mindfuck, if I'm being honest with you. It just really shows me that the American political system really has sold out Jews. It has sold out people of color. It has sold out women. It has sold out anybody it needs to in its absolute hatred for Donald Trump and the right. And it's something that really saddens me. I'd really love to hear what everybody else thinks out there, because this is just something that, for me at least, is unbelievable. And he won with such a large section. Over 70% of Democrats in Maine voted for somebody that has a Nazi tattoo on his body. A few years ago, I think this would have been absolutely unthinkable. Yet here we are in 2026, unfortunately. But we are not just about the bad things here on Yisrael Thrive. We also want to talk about the good things as well, too. And so I will say personally, my rose for the week has been the absolute success and virality of a t-shirt that I created from my t-shirt line, Shayna and Tanya World. The F Mom Donning t-shirt absolutely sold out our first run. We were able to sell out 1,000 copies of this shirt, and I'm now on pre-orders for the next line. We're also creating more merch as well too, and we're always taking feedback. So in case anybody out there has a special type of shirt that you want to or sticker or anything else that you want designed, let me know. Send me a DM, and I'm always happy to see what I can do. And then let me see what was that was something that I already talked about. Okay. And so without further ado, we can go ahead and bring on our guest, Israeli journalist Nathan Jeffay. Hi, Nathan. Welcome to Yisrael Thrive.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Nathan, you've really had a fascinating journey from growing up in Manchester to living in London and to making Aliyah. Would you mind sharing just a few things that contributed to your decision to ultimately move to Israel?
Sure, yeah. I mean, being in Israel and being a journalist and getting to tell the stories of Israel is fascinating and sometimes very depressing and sometimes quite uplifting. And there's been stories on everything from, the really tough stuff that you don't want to do, like going to Leonard Cohen concerts and seeing Paul McCartney here, to the other stuff like the wars and the elections and all that kind of thing. So definitely a mixed bag. But I ended up here because, well, I guess you could say because probably the second date that I went on with my college girlfriend, she said that she planned on moving to Israel. So if I wanted to be serious about this relationship, I would have to go too. So here we are, 4 children later in Israel. So yeah.
I would say love is a great motivator, would you?
Yeah, not bad, not bad. It's worked out okay for me. So yeah, a bit of journalism, bit of romance, and here we are.
That's so lovely. That's so lovely. I would love to get your thoughts on what's happening in England right now, because it seems pretty bleak, for the rest of us looking out, in from the outside, I would guess. Since you're someone that's from there, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an excruciatingly hard year specifically. I remember very clearly on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish year, I was across the road at our neighbors, who were following the news and said, there's reports that something's happened in Manchester. And of course, it turned out that that was an attack on a synagogue that was, really just a few minutes from the school that I went to. And that was, absolutely terrifying because, we all grew up with security at synagogues, which, felt like a formality. And, would you ever need them? Would they ever really need to do anything? And, it just came down to the security people basically being heroes, minimizing the number of casualties. And, those images from that day are just, thoroughly haunting. And from there, we kind of jumped to what we've seen in London, what we saw happening in London, which also was, very scary, very haunting. And it wasn't just the big incidents in London, it was smaller incidents, videos surfacing of people really feeling very intimidated, places that I know, places that I recognize. And so it's a very worrying situation for the Jewish community in England. I was saying to my mother that it really feels that she kind of, grew up, or she brought us up in this golden era for English Jewry. Her father was there in England at a time when there was worry of anti-Semitism. He changed his name from Levi to Harrow in order to, kind of protect himself in that respect. And yet, when my mum was growing up, she didn't experience, any significant anti-Semitism. And I grew up feeling very much part of English culture, and yet it's different out there today. It's very different feeling today.
Yeah, where I would say too that I grew up in the United States, but have a similar feeling of until 2023, I really didn't experience any kind of intense, hardcore, unrelenting anti-Semitism like we've seen since October 23rd. Would you say that that's been kind of the experience too, growing up across the pond?
Well, I definitely grew up with a degree of anti-Semitism. It wasn't completely anti-Semitism free, yet I would say that it was kind of slogans and being intimidated as you walked back from synagogue and having a baseball cap on at that time. and being made very aware of things, but there wasn't the stigma of, okay, I'm introducing myself to a room full of people on a university campus or in a professional meeting. Do I identify myself as Jewish? Is there a cost to doing that? If you're a student, are you going to be isolated because of these things? So that is a much newer addition. So definitely, I would say that we were aware of anti-Semitism, and it was, it's always been a feature of British society, but not in that kind of are you going to identify yourself kind of way.
Totally. And I know that you sent me a video that I'd love to play for our viewers, and then we can kind of talk about it afterwards. Is it okay if I share that with you?
Sure, yeah.
Perfect.
To Greece, this city was once more Jewish even than New York until it wasn't. Behind me is the monument to 50,000 Jews who went in a single heartbeat, and it feels kind of weird standing here. In fact, I feel in the way. A tourist just came up and said, "Excuse me, could you move out of the way? I'm trying to take a photograph." I just came out. I said, "You sure you wouldn't like me in the photograph? I'm a real live Jew." She looked at me, polite but emotionless, and said, "Excuse me, sir, please move out of the way. I really want to take this photograph before sunset."
Wow.
Yeah. So we missed
Tell me a little bit more about
the
that.
beginning of where that was. That was in Salonika in Greece. Thessaloniki, as it's called locally, or Salonika as it's known among Jewish people. This is a place where the Jewish community, this was more Jewish than New York. It was, actually majority Jewish at some times. And, there in this part of Greece, in the 40s, 50,000 lives just evaporated in a moment. And I was actually just changing planes in the city. I was on my way back from a course and my flight was delayed. So I decided to go to the city. And it was, just this moment where, sometimes it really feels that life actually speaks in poetry. And people, you never know on social media what is, a real experience and what is someone just, thinking, well, this could have happened. But literally, I just got there. I, put my case down, put my bag down, started looking at the monument. I was there for about 30 seconds before somebody came up and really just said, could you move out of the way while we take this photograph? And for me, it was like, it was like a poem of Yehuda Amichai. He has this beautiful poem about someone in Jerusalem and, someone trying to take a photograph and paying no notice to the local. But here it was just this kind of, crazy thing of it just, there was a tourist moving along who clearly felt, something big and monument-like. I don't know if they even noticed what it was, must take a photograph before we move on. And, for me, it was just this complete contrast of what the monument is about compared to how these items of history are consumed. So it just came out. I just said, would you like this live Jew in the photograph? And not a hint of any sense of recognition.
Wow. And that was the part that really hit me the most, that this person may or may not even know what they're looking at, even know what it means to someone like you or us. And just to have that, now just move out of the way, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. And that's kind of my fear for the rest of the world as well, too, because I know that Iraq was also a huge hub of Jewry in the Middle East as well, prior to the 1940s, in the Farhouds. And now that we're seeing, Mamdani elected in New York City, honestly, I'm going to speak as an American. It's my fear that we're going to see places like New York City also be drained of their Jews. And it's pretty scary to me.
There are many markers of Jewish life, that I think the Jewish imprint there does get forgotten. I mean, something as routine as one of the universities I attended in England, the University of Leeds, and I don't know if you heard of a famous English shopping brand Marks and Spencer's. So Marks and Spencer's was established by Jewish people, one of them from Leeds, and that family actually made a very large donation to the University of Leeds, and there's a section of the university that's named after the family. And I remember very clearly, this was a few years ago, this was before 2023, that there was this kind of, very big meeting of a very angry pro-Palestinian group that I can't remember. They wanted to, reduce Jewish life on campus or organize Jewish life or whatever it was. And the meeting was ironically convened in the hall that was, donated by this illustrious Jewish family. And, I think you have this kind of thing happening everywhere, that it's these little pieces of our history, or in Saloniki, these very big pieces of our history that are just being sidelined. And while we're talking of history, I think, we struggle for the words to put this together. We struggle for kind of, the language to actually express this. But what we are seeing is indeed Jewish history being subverted and used as the language with which to criticize Jewish life today, or Israel. And when I say Israel, I mean the basics, the existence of Israel. I'm not getting into kind of, a certain political party in Israel, but, really to kind of chip away at the very foundations of the kind of thing, the essence of who we are. And that language of subverting history is really very, very worrying. I know your co-host, very versed in history as well. And, it's clear from some of her posts, this is really, one of the biggest concerns of our generation. And it gets even scarier when we think that, if there is enough material on the internet that is doing this subversion of history, it's not only there, but that is being drunk in by the LLMs, by the AI models that we're turning to for our answers. And, I don't think we'll get to a point where, the AI models are denying Jewish history, but I think we will very easily get to a point where someone will ask a question and Jewish history will be a narrative. There will be, the GPT model will say to you, well, there is one view that there was a Jewish temple in Jerusalem and one view that there wasn't. Whereas, it's basic fact that there was, or it's basic fact that, the events of the Second World War were primarily directed at Jewish people. And I think we're going to see this eaten away at, which is very worrying.
I would agree with you. And I've already seen just blatant anti-Semitic tropes coming back into discourse, such as, Holocaust denial, things like that. And I had just watched a Holocaust documentary a few nights ago, and there was one historian that had said that back in Germany in the 1930s, there was kind of this sense of, well, the pessimists are the ones that are leaving. It's the optimists that are staying, because the optimists believe, no, this is my country. We're German. They're going to come back to their rational minds again. And it was ultimately those optimists that we know what happened to them. And that's really my fear too, is in this larger world, that too many people are going to be optimists and too many people are going to not value their lives more than valuing the money that they have in the bank or other things like that.
It's always very, very difficult to call, because none of us can tell the future, and the stories that we, the way that we talk about the past is always, we always have that kind of great optimism that's kind of drilled into us. And I think the narrative of the American dream has been universalized, and everybody can, if you just think positive, we can all kind of reach for the stars and this type of thing. And it's very difficult to call whether we need to stay positive and really try to impact these societies, or whether something is very broken, and the narratives are getting out of control, and it's very, very difficult to call. And I can see, families starting to discuss voices that I would have never expected from the UK to be who are talking about, the possibility of, maybe not even Aliyah, but post Brexit, should they be having another citizenship? Should they have other options? Because it's it's a different world out there, and especially in the UK, where people feel attacked from both right and left, which is, of course, the ultimate irony of Jewish history, when the Jewish people are criticized, or kind of that's a British understatement, criticized, but from both directions.
I was stuck in the middle with you,
Yeah.
100%. Well, moving on to something a little more positive. How did you end up becoming a journalist? What made you want to become a journalist?
Oh, well, actually, while I was still at school, I really, really was drawn to journalism. I was very excited to work in journalism. It was initially radio broadcast that got me really excited. So as a little 16-year-old with a squeaky voice, I went along to that bastion of journalism, the BBC, and got a kind of part-time stroke voluntary job. I would go out and interview people using a big reel-to-reel tape recorder. Do you remember the big reel-to-reel tape recorders? And if you wanted to edit the interview, you would take out a razor blade and you would literally cut that piece of the interview out. And started there, and got a commission from a local newspaper to go to March of the Living. And from there, kind of, got an offer from a Jewish publication, and kind of, one thing led to another. And it was really, really exciting. And all the way through college was kind of, writing, going on expeditions and that kind of thing. Including my first foreign expedition, which was to spend Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, in the Ukrainian city of Uman, where a lot of Hasidic Jews go, as a kind of, part journalism, part sociology experiment. So, got into all these kind of weird and wacky and bizarre kind of situations, which, a lot of serious journalism, but also a lot of humor going on in the background somewhere, which I guess I've been storing up all the way through as well.
You must have so many good stories to tell.
Yeah. I mean, I think my all-time favorite is probably having to cover a concert by Paul McCartney for an English publication, and for it transpiring that they actually didn't want me to write anything at all about the concert. And all I could ever conclude was that they, that imagination of what Israel is actually like, they just kind of wanted me there on assassination watch, because they were convinced that something would happen to Paul McCartney. So I literally just got sent to a concert just to watch and enjoy it, and didn't have to write anything, which was, quite amusing.
That's interesting. Did you at least get to meet Sir Paul McCartney?
I didn't, although at another concert where I did write, I got very close to the great Leonard Cohen, which was very exciting. That was great. Yeah,
that would have been totally exciting for me.
Although my all-time favorite experience was definitely meeting Grover. Oh, the picture is actually behind me. It's you can actually see the picture of me with Grover by the Western Wall when they recorded Sesame Street there in Jerusalem. So that was one of the nice moments. Let's see if we can. There you go. That's me and Grover.
I love it. Oh my goodness, that's adorable.
Yeah, everyone thinks it's photoshopped, but it was actually a Friday, and I held up my hand and I said to Grover, Shabbat Shalom, and he said back in his little deep voice, Shabbat Shalom, and yeah, probably happier than a lot of the other things that I've reported on, which has been, I've actually lost count of the number of wars and the number of elections, because we have a lot of elections in Israel, as you know. We kind of, we can't stop having elections. In fact, I think Israel is probably the only place in the world where you can meet someone you like at the polling station and say, hey, do you come here often? And the answer is yes.
How often do elections in Israel happen?
Well, I mean, I've been here, since 2007, and I've probably reported on like 12 elections. So yeah, we have a lot of elections, and the children get a day off school every time there's an election. So, they love it. They love it. If I say to my children, who do you want to, when there was a lot of elections, and I would say to them, who do you want to win the election, they would just select the most unstable candidate, because they knew that government would collapse quite quickly and there would be another day off school.
Smart kids.
Yeah.
I've also heard that there's tons of political parties in Israel too. It's not like the whole binary left versus right, as it is in the United States either.
Oh, I mean, so many political parties, as I will be explaining when I launch my election website, which is coming soon. So, if people want to see that, they can just follow me on Instagram, and I'll announce it when it's ready. But yeah, loads and loads of political parties. In fact, that's actually a remnant of when the British were in charge of the place here, because they wanted lots of small factions to represent the Jewish community. So we inherited this very dysfunctional system of proportional representation, which encourages you to have a small, very factional party that represents your exact identity. Like you might have the party of people with green wallpaper and black earphones or whatever, and then this in turn leads to a system where we have these very dysfunctional coalition governments which pack together loads of parties and give undue strength to some of the most extreme politicians. And also, because you've got so many parties and they all want to be part of it, you actually have so many government ministers, because if you want to bring so many people into the government, they all want a job. They've got to have the most important job. I mean, most of them have a Jewish mother, so they need to have an important job to represent to her. So we'll have, 120 people in the parliament, and you could have, 15, 20, 25 of them being ministers or deputy ministers, because, it's that's how it works. Everyone wants an important job. Yeah. In fact, my joke is how many Israeli government ministers does it take to change a light bulb?
How many?
One, the minister for the changing of light bulbs. Everybody has to have a job.
Got to make Ema happy, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So
we're going to have an election in the fall, so that'll keep us all busy.
It's getting exciting then. After nearly 20 years of reporting in Israel and about wars, like you said, what do you think foreign audiences misunderstand about Israel?
Well, it might be a shorter conversation to say what people understand accurately about Israel, but we can try and crack the other one and what people misunderstand. I think, if I had a list of things, I think, gross misunderstanding number one would be, just people really having no idea about the history. And it sounds very kind of, academic to say history, but I think that a huge segment of people consuming news overseas really believe that they're following a story where there was, a country, a state that was, dismantled on one day in 1948 and to make way for Israel, and that's where the whole story started, and draw your moral judgments from there. And that is that is remarkable and troubling, and also understandable, because at the end of the day, when I'm reading news reports about the history of insert name of any other country, how much background do I really know? But the difference here is that I'm not turning most of those countries into my champion cause, whereas there's a lot of people who have really zero background, zero knowledge, turning this part of the land into their cause. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges. One of the biggest challenges is trying to squeeze a little bit of context, a little bit of fact and background into reporting when you're so competing for every word, for every second. That's extremely challenging. It's also extremely challenging that there is really very little understanding of who the population of Israel is. People, there is no recognition that when rockets are being fired, that they are just as likely to fall in an Arab town as in a Jewish town, and they are not, they do not discriminate. And if I was to go for one other, I would also say the way that people, activists, and by extension news media in each country superimpose their own societal narratives onto the conflict here. So, if you're in America, not you, but a lot of people are trying to superimpose American race dynamics onto the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which just does not stand up, is not relevant. It's like comparing apples with pears. The race thing doesn't stack up. If you, not that it's even relevant, but a huge part of Israel's Jewish population is certainly not what you would call white and European. So just that complete mismatch. And if you're, for example, from the UK, you're trying to, a young British person is often trying to work through that, guilt of colonialism and Britain's empire and all that kind of thing by superimposing a lot of that onto Israel. And really, in terms of journalism, getting people to actually view and relate to the Israel story on its own terms is very, very challenging.
I would agree with that. The amount of people that I hear really genuinely believing that there was a country called Palestine, even saying seriously things like Jesus was Palestinian. It's like, no, there wasn't even Palestine around during those times, What do you think when historians look back on today, they're going to see about, what do you think they'll think about this point in time?
I think that we will look back on today as a rupture in terms of what we thought about historical fact. And I'll explain this in the sense of, I would often say to my brother, who's a Holocaust educator, if only in those days, in those times in Europe, we would have had video cameras, we would have had people filming every moment on their smartphones to have testament to the reality of what happened, to the inhumanity of what happened. If only we would have had that kind of evidence. Can you imagine? We would not be facing Holocaust denial today, and we would have a much more educated and less prejudiced society. And then on a single morning on October 7th, 2023, not only did the unthinkable happen, but it was videoed. It wasn't even videoed in a way that one side could dispute the legitimacy of the footage afterwards, because it was videoed by the perpetrators, intentionally videoed by the perpetrators to report what they did, and not only to report what they did, but to report actions that I won't outline here because we don't need to, but actions that they did in order to intentionally create psychological fear and stream that to a population, and did it for the cameras. And yet, despite all of that, despite having the kind of evidence that my brother and I had always spoken about, imagine if you had this, despite having all of that, it meant so little in the big narrative. Despite having all that, it was only days before we had denialism of the very things that were being intentionally publicized. I think that is a rupture in history, a rupture in how we view history, a rupture in how we view truth and the recording of history. And I think that also it is a rupture in the idea that if only we had good enough education, then we would be preventing something like this from happening, because the education didn't do what it said on the tin. It didn't do what it said on the carton. And, you know, all of us who've been involved in that kind of education were left scratching our heads saying, well, you know, we did what we were supposed to do. We went and spoke to groups, and even in my case, took groups of non-Jewish students to Europe and did all the right things. And yet it didn't have that desired effect. It didn't give us the society that we expected. And in some cases, even the things that were seen are being redirected against Israel. So it's this kind of complete historical rupture.
100%. I was reading, I think it was a Pew poll talking about how Gen Z was the most anti-Semitic generation since the 1930s. And that resonates with me because I have also seen that footage that Hamas took. And I've also questioned that, like, why are these people either excusing this footage or saying it didn't exist or saying it was something else? And that's always really blown my mind. And I know that you're planning your North American speaking tour, correct?
Yes, I am. It's always, wow, I always love coming to the States. I always love meeting groups in general. I mean, at the moment, it's wonderful because, you know, a few times each week I get to meet a group of students from Birthright coming here and doing one of their geopolitical seminars, which is always very, very thought-provoking. And in the fall, I will be heading to the States, visiting several communities where I'll be talking to the community, taking questions. And what I love about these visits is that they are so interactive. You know, I don't like the old style where someone comes along and gives a lecture and just, you know, puts out there what they think that people know. I think that it's so fascinating going to a community and hearing what a community's identity is, how they are living the current experiences, because at the end of the day, you know, the last 3 years have impacted all of us. When I went in the last but one Iran war to interview President Herzog, I asked him specifically, you know, for a message for Jewish communities, because I made the point, I said, you know, this time since October 2023, it's no longer that diaspora communities are being caught in the crossfire. This was all unleashed also to unsettle diaspora communities. So coming, sitting with people, talking with people always feels like a privilege. One of the places I'll be going to is Scranton, where I've spoken the last 2 years in the fall. Really interesting meeting people there, hearing what's on people's minds. And what I'm feeling more and more as I go to meet communities is that actually the nature of what a community really needs from a visitor from Israel is different to what it was. You know, I think before 2023, it would have been either a geopolitical briefing, or it might have been about the elections, or it may have been about Israeli society, whereas today when you have that 150, 200, 300 people walking into the hall, people need a lot of boxes ticking. People need to check a lot of boxes. Different people want different things. And so you really have to weave it all together. So for some people, it will be about getting the latest from a journalist in Israel and really understanding what's going on. For others, it's about, okay, we know that stuff from the news, but we want to feel the kishkas of Israeli society. And we want to feel it in a way that's not from an AI tool and not from any website. We want to feel it from someone who's coming from there, who can give us that sense. And for other people still, it's about less about knowledge and more about an emotional feeling, about processing what they're feeling in relation to someone arriving from Israel, feeling that sense of solidarity. And we feel that when we discuss human stories, when we discuss stories of, people living Israel each day, when we share that sense of what's going on the ground. And the other thing that I think everybody in the room wants to feel uplifted with something that is uplifting, and there is always something uplifting from Israel. I think everybody wants to laugh. Everybody wants, at least a couple of points in the evening to laugh, to feel that togetherness. And togetherness, I think, is a really important part of it too, because Zoom seminars are lovely and they're great, but putting people in a room together and marking those dates, marking those moments, saying it was the Chagim, a few weeks ago, how's this year going to be different? And then, pushing each other in the line to get a cup of tea or whatever. These are deeply human experiences, and that whole human side of things is really kind of, what keeps bringing me back to the States.
That's so wonderful. And I would agree. I feel like ever since COVID, when we had all the lockdowns and stuff, there's sort of been a piece of socialization that hasn't really come back fully and all the way. So I completely agree. Whenever I go to like a talk at my shul or something, it is very nice to be in the same room with people, with the speakers, and to be able to ask questions live. And I think you're right. Ultimately, what people are looking for is a little bit of humanity and connection.
Yeah, that's definitely a phenomenon today, when I think facts and information, although we don't exactly know when it's trustworthy, are easier than ever to get hold of, more than ever at our fingertips. We go onto ChatGPT or Gemini or online, and we can get hold of those facts. But that doesn't replace the conversations. That doesn't replace the back and forth. That doesn't replace speaking to one's children. And personally, I in our house, we turn off devices on Shabbat, and I quite like the uncertainty of, being unsure about something and wondering about it, and then having those conversations. And by the way, in terms of the trip, if anyone is watching or listening to this who would like me to come to their synagogue or federation or JCC or church even, they can just send me a message through Instagram or go to my website, which is the same, nathanonisrael.com.
Wonderful. Yes. And I also understand that you're a best-selling author as well, too. Tell us about your book.
Yeah, the book actually is completely unrelated to anything specifically Israeli. It's actually a dive into technology and how we can regain trust in the technology that we use, with so much misinformation and all of these types of things. So it's a book co-authored with a friend and colleague, which is about the technologies that are going to make a difference to us, specifically blockchain, which is a fascinating world in itself. So that's been interesting. I've been working on a novel as well, which is set in the old city of Jerusalem, which is probably a bit more fun than the blockchain book, than the technology book, if I can say that. I might upset my co-author. Hopefully he's not watching, but yeah.
We won't tell him. How is this your first time writing nonfiction?
As a book, yes. I mean, not as kind of within the world of journalism, but as a book, yes. It was an interesting story. The publisher kind of came to us because they wanted a book on one specific topic, and it was, it was a lot of pressure to get the book out there, and quite surreal because there were all these few ups and downs in Israel in recent months, as you may know. So there's always something very surreal about when you're in a bomb shelter and you're focusing on something completely different, or But I guess that's part of life in Israel. So it's always a bit of an adventure.
Completely. Now, I know I would call myself one of the quote pessimists that are leaving my home country to come to Israel. But I will say that I feel incredibly optimistic about my future in Israel. Whenever I read the news about, how the shekel is gaining strength and there's all these new technologies that are being developed in Israel, it really seems like Israel's going to have a golden era pretty soon. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, people say it was a blessing in disguise that Israel didn't have great reserves of natural resources, because it forced us to be very innovative. Whether it's that or whether it's just that determination, there is a lot of initiative in society. The different groups that come here have definitely brought a lot, including the brain power of Soviet people from former Soviet countries coming here. And I think, it surprised everybody that not only since 2023, also since COVID, that Israel has, that the economy has thrived, that, we've seen research thrive and all these types of things. It is remarkable. And now we're going to have you as well. So, we're guaranteed for success.
Yes, exactly. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for joining us today. Please go out there and find Nathan Jeffay on his personal website, nathanisrael.com. And then it's also Nathan on Israel on Instagram as well, too, correct?
It is. I've been letting the side down on Instagram a little bit. I've been a bit busy and not been posting enough, but if people follow, the great thing is, having teenage children, every time someone follows me on Instagram, it really annoys them because they think I'm too old to be on Instagram. So that is the reason that people should follow.
Excellent. I love getting one back on the kids. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you today. And I hope everyone out there has a wonderful rest of your week. Keep on thriving out there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Bye.